What's going on, guys? I'm Brian and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the Scythe Katana 5. It's another compact, budget-ish single tower CPU cooler. Like the Arctic Freezer 7X that we checked out last week, it finds itself in a pretty tight space as there are slightly larger, slightly more expensive options out there that also provide quite a bit more of performance. The big test the Katana 5 will face today is to see whether or not its smaller form factor and budget-ish price of about $33 will make it worth a grab over other options currently on the market. Now, for transparency, Scythe did send this cooler over to me for a review, but as I'm sure you guys all know, this will not impact my review in any way. Let's get this review started by talking about what's included in the box. You're gonna, of course, get the cooler and then its 92mm fan. You get one set of fan clips, mounting hardware for both AMD and Intel based sockets, enough thermal paste for one application, as well as the installation guide. This cooler is essentially compatible with most modern CPU sockets, but as always, I'll leave a link to the product page in the description box below so you guys can go ahead and jump to that product page, check out, and make sure that it'll work for your system. So as I said before, this is a compact single tower CPU cooler. It stands at about 135mm tall, 106mm wide, and holds a depth of about 105mm. Memory compatibility should not be an issue with this cooler at all due to the offset heat pipe design, and overall it should fit in basically all mid-tower or larger cases while also being able to squeeze into some ITX cases. I highly recommend checking your case's CPU cooler clearance to make sure that this cooler is going to work for you. At the top of the cooler, we're going to have a metal top cover with the Scythe logo directly in the middle, and then there's going to be these 6 metal caps. They're going to cover the 3 double-sided 6mm nickel-plated copper heat pipes that extend off of the cold plate. We then find a pretty tightly packed fin array underneath the top cover, which should help with heat dissipation. And along with our fin array, we can mount our 92mm fan to either side of the cooler. Since you can mount it to either side, this does mean that you could potentially purchase a second 92mm fan and do a push-pull configuration with this cooler. I honestly wouldn't recommend it, and it probably wouldn't do all that much for you, but it is an option if that's something that you're thinking about doing, as long as you're able to get a second set of fan clips as well as an additional 92mm fan. On the bottom of the cooler right here, we are going to have a nicely machined nickel-plated copper cold plate, and then we're going to also have those 3 double-sided 6mm nickel-coated copper heat pipes that extend from beneath it that I was mentioning earlier. We are also going to have our mounting hardware for our Intel-based system. That's what's by default, it's Intel-based, and this can easily be swapped out by unscrewing these 4 screws and attaching the AMD mounting plate. Make sure when you're attaching the AMD plate that you pay attention to which side you actually attach the AMD mounting plate to and how you're actually attaching it, because the little switch, the little lock that locks it in once you actually have it on your CPU, needs to be facing towards your GPU. If you face it the other way, it won't have proper pressure and it won't work as you need it to. I didn't think this would be a big difference, but I actually had it the opposite way and my temperatures were totally different and a lot worse when I had it that way. So I switched it over, redid all my testing, and found the temperatures to drop quite a bit. In either case, installation is going to be basically identical to that of the respective platform's stock coolers, which in my opinion is a good thing. For Intel, all you're going to need to do is add a little bit of thermal paste to your CPU and then use the push pins that are on here, push them down in a diagonal fashion, then push the other 2 down so you hear them click, and then you're going to attach the fan to the cooler, plug the fan in, and that's it. For AMD, all you're going to have to do is swap out the mounting plate for the AMD one, go ahead, add a little bit of thermal paste to your CPU, clip the AMD mounting plate to the black retainers that are going to be attached to your motherboard, and then go ahead and lock it down with a lever on the mounting plate. Make sure that you attach the lever part of the mounting plate second, so last, as if you attach it first, you may not have enough room to get the other side, the non-lever side, clipped in properly. Overall, just like installing these stock coolers, the process is a piece of cake and you really shouldn't have any issues at all. If you've installed their stock coolers, Intel or AMD, you should have no problem installing these ones either. Now, when it comes to testing, I did all of my tests on an open air test bench using a Ryzen 5 3600 clocked at 4 gigahertz and 1.2 volts. I use this combination to make sure our results are consistent across all the CPU coolers I tested. And along with the Ryzen 5 3600, we use the same MSI B450 Tomahawk Max motherboard and an MSI 1660 Super Gaming X graphics card. So before we get into the numbers, I always like to show you guys what this cooler sounds like as it ramps up from 30% fan speed to 100% fan speed. I also want to show you guys what this cooler will sound like under load in comparison to the AMD Wraith Stealth, as well as the AMD Wraith Prism. This will give you a good idea of how much of an upgrade, if at all, this cooler is compared to the AMD stock coolers in pure acoustics. And the ramp up testing I show will also help you tweak your fan curve, so you kind of listen to it, see at what point you don't like it, and then you can tweak your fan curve so that it caps out at that point. All right, so acoustically, as you guys just heard, this cooler is not an upgrade over the Wraith Stealth and Wraith Prism on the default fan curve. You would definitely need to modify the fan curve for this cooler to make it an upgrade over either of those coolers. Under load and with the stock fan curve, it's actually much louder than either of those two coolers, and its noise level at 100% fan speed is substantially louder than any of the coolers I used in my testing for this review. The Katana 5 caps out at 55 decibels, which is a whopping 25 decibels above my noise floor. And yes, it's noticeable and very loud. Now, I know this kind of looks bad because you want to replace your cooler with like a quieter one that performs a little bit better, right? But it's actually not all that negative when it comes to like the noise output. You can easily tweak the fan curve to make this cooler substantially quieter under load without losing a ton of performance. I highly recommend capping out your fan curve to about 60 to 65% for this cooler, as this will greatly limit the noise produced while also keeping your cooler performance towards its peak. To provide some reference to that statement, in my AIDA64 stress test with the default fan curve, we found that the Katana 5 was right up there with the best CPU coolers I tested for this video. Of course, I didn't test this cooler against larger, much more expensive CPU coolers, but I did test it against comparable coolers along with the much larger Deep Cool Gamix GT and the much more expensive Scythe Big Shuriken 3. The Scythe Katana 5 maxed out at a temperature of 64.8 degrees Celsius and had an average temperature of 63.7 degrees Celsius. These numbers more or less match the Arctic Freezer 7X and Gamix GT, both of which are single tower coolers, but unlike the Katana 5 and the Freezer 7X, the Gamix GT is actually a much larger single tower cooler. One of the bigger takeaways from this test is going to be the noise output though. Even though the Katana 5 matched the performance of the Freezer 7X and the Gamix GT, it was also substantially louder, hitting about 50 decibels during the test. The Freezer 7X only gets up to about 40 decibels, while the Gamix GT gets up to about 41 decibels in this exact same test. This is where the noise normalized testing comes in, and this is why it's so important that we do the noise normalized testing, because if this fan's running a lot faster, then obviously, yes, it could probably cool a little bit better. And this is also how I came up with my recommendation of capping the fan curve to about 60 to 65%. So I reran my AIDA64 testing, but with the fan noise normalized to 40 decibels. The Katana 5 did not top the charts for this, but it still did pretty well, averaging a temperature of 66 degrees Celsius while maxing out at 67.5 degrees Celsius. This is just a little bit worse than the Freezer 7X that averaged a temperature of 62.7 degrees Celsius and maxed out at 65 degrees Celsius. So while noise normalized, the Katana 5 performs slightly worse, but it's still pretty good, especially once you take a look at like the gaming results as well. For gaming, I set the fan speed back to the default fan curve and I play some of my favorite games and see where the temperatures cap out as well as where they end up averaging. The Katana 5 does really well, capping out at just 50.8 degrees Celsius and averaging about 47.7 degrees degrees Celsius. It also only hits about 40 decibels for noise output. Compared to the Arctic Freezer 7X, the Katana 5 is pretty impressive, as the Freezer 7X maxes out at 56.6 degrees Celsius and averages a temperature of 48.8 degrees Celsius. This is while only producing about 35 decibels of noise. So yes, the Katana 5 is still a little bit louder, but I found that you can slow down the fan by tightening the fan curve and get better noise performance, and you'll still see better performance while gaming. And so the Scythe Katana 5, it's competitive when it comes to cooling. You can tweak the fan curve to make it competitive on the noise front as well. It's super easy to install on AMD as well as Intel based systems, but there's a pretty glaring issue with it that I haven't really touched base on yet, and I haven't really talked about yet today. It's price. I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, but it goes for about $33 as of making this video. Even if you need a compact cooler for your case like this, I kind of find it hard to justify spending $33 on this cooler when the Arctic Freezer 7X is about $9 cheaper, and it literally trades blows with this cooler. Yes, the Katana 5's larger heatsink allows it to have better performance in gaming and medium to light load tasks, but it's not like the other coolers have unreasonable gaming temperatures anyway. So as much as I've actually enjoyed what Scythe typically brings to the market, I think the price on this cooler is a huge miss. If it was about the same price as the Freezer 7X, I would basically have the same conclusion as I did in that cooler. Basically, if you needed a compact cooler on a super budget, then this could be a good pickup. But until this price drops, this is kind of where I stand. I feel like, you know, the Freezer 7X is a better buy, being that it's like, again, $9 cheaper, or you can even spend a little bit more money and get something like the Hyper 212 Black Edition if you can fit it into your case. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up, and if you loved it, make sure you subscribe for more content just like this, and drop any questions you have in the comments below, or go ahead and join our community Discord, which is absolutely free. That'll be in the description box below. A link will. You can go ahead and go in there. You can ask your questions there as well. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.